Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larson. This is part 2 of our interview with Chris Jones.
I think you said it well. And I think a lot of people that will make comments and share excerpts from my blog tend to say this is the hardest thing I've ever read, but it's simultaneously the most inspirational. Because what they're doing is they're recognizing that, yes, something really hurts, but also I can do something with this. And what meaning does this have in my own life? And I think everybody's hungry for meaning and purpose.
Our second take, since I just started the interview without pushing record. So, Chris, let's recap the first half of this interview. But let's actually just jump to that last question. So this idea of how we have a natural temptation in leadership positions to monologue instead of to have group activity. Yeah. And you were talking about this idea of how, I was asking you, why do you think it is that as leaders, we naturally lean towards monologuing instead of thinking of opportunities for everyone to contribute?
Great. And I think that a lot of times we forget. We forget that everyone else has great ideas. We forget that people come to the table with life experiences that are completely germane to the thing we're talking about. And so if you can engage learners at that level, where they come to the table with their life experience, insights, and anecdotal kind of stories, that it just creates a richer learning environment. And so one of our axioms in terms of building curriculum, one of our governing philosophies, is that dialogue is always better than monologue.
So let's run a little exercise. I was telling you before, CEO client I was on the phone with this morning, we were talking about involving everybody in the organization in creating their own standard operating procedures for their job, for their role. They create their own recipe of here's how to do my job. And as you know, so now there's a standard that we can have continuous improvement based off of. We can create efficiencies from. In a position like that, knowing that that's a program this CEO is interested in implementing at their creative agency, what kind of advice would you have of how to make that more of a dialogue than a monologue?
Well, let's suppose there are 3 or 4 people in a department that have kind of shared tasks, but they're coming up with their SOPs. They might gain from saying, hey, guys, this is what I'm going to do. And somebody else might say, well, this is what I'll do. And so they sort of have this cross-pollination of ideas and insights to help refine all of their SOPs, particularly if they're fairly related. Does that make sense? So encourage them not just to develop their own thing in a silo, but get peer review and get some insights. I think you'll learn a lot from that.
Yeah. It's funny how sometimes when I do stuff like that, I don't necessarily want peer review. I just want everyone to tell me how smart I am. Any thoughts for helping somebody like me come to it with more humility and being more interested in the result than my own ego?
Wow. Okay, so I'm a book geek. Another book I want to write is called Executive Hubris, and it's about how institutional and individual humility can save both the individual and the group. And, I think that's just a matter of mindfulness and practice. I think it's okay to not have all the answers and to learn from others. And sometimes I think we worry too much that if somebody else gave me an idea or gives me a course correction, that somehow I'm deficient as a professional. And in reality, I think we're better off if we can all just drink from each other's cups and learn from each other.
So how do I remind myself of that? How do I get the focus off myself and instead care about my team more than my ego, care about our result more than how good I look or having people think I'm smart?
I think the first thing to do is to tell the whole team that that's what I struggle with, and then say, will you help me when you sense this?
I love that one. It's funny how much guts it takes to out ourselves, doesn't it?
Yeah, but you gain so much more trust when you do that. When people realize, because everyone knows when they see a pretender, and we all pretend on some level, so if we can just put the pretending aside and just be real for a minute, oh man, that's when magic happens. Trust and engagement go up on levels never seen before when we can be that.
I'm constantly asking people for, hey, tell me a real life person that lived like that, who, there's a pattern the rest of us can learn from. Who's somebody in your life that you feel like lived like that? Who do you want to turn out like later?
I've had no examples in that category, to be honest with you. And so I've made a deliberate intent to do just what I've not seen. So I can't point to anybody that's done that. I mean, I've seen them in books here and there, and I don't even remember their names. Yeah. But in reality, I've seen so much chest thumping and hairy chest in my professional career. I'm just tired of it. And that's one of the reasons why I'm incubating some of the companies I am, is because we're trying to attack that same kind of hubris.
It's interesting. One of my business partners that also helps out a lot with our charity came out of one of the classified units of special ops. Mm-hmm. And I remember my wife and he and I were at a lunch together, and we were talking about leadership kind of subjects, and my wife made some sort of comment about different commanders in the military, whatever, and he's like, "Oh man, I've learned from every single one of them." And she was like, "Really?" He's like, "Yeah, I mean, a bunch of the times it was learning what not to do, but I still consider that a benefit of like, oh yeah, that's what I was able to learn from him." You know, the guy, the very first episode of this podcast, Chip Huth, he was head of Kansas City SWAT, high risk search warrant team for years and stuff. His dad was a career criminal. And he said basically like, my plan was to just do the opposite of everything my dad had done. That was his operating procedure.
That's great.
You know? Yeah. So what about this new game Spark? You know, it's on Kickstarter today. Did you have collaborators with that? Was there some leadership in getting all the team to work together, or was it more of a solo effort?
So I have some employees that I roped into the meeting. I did it kind of in a skunkworks model for a while. I was developing it privately, and then I'd bring in some of my great team members. And, you know, they would tip over my sacred cows, things that I felt like were really special.
Like, what's an example? What's one of them?
Oh, man, where do I even start? Yeah. For example, there were some ideas on the way we would structure our cards and these story prompts. I had this feeling like this was the way to do it. And then they would come over and say, that's not going to work, and this is why. And I would just immediately let go of it. I'd be like, you know what, that's right. In my philosophy in our team is that the best idea should always win. It doesn't matter where it came from. And so, you know, a lot of times these guys would come in and help me shape this game and make it better than I could have ever made it by myself.
You know, it's interesting, this idea of new employees, right? In certain ways, they're the least likely to have subject matter expertise about whatever it is our team does or our organization does.
Yeah.
And yet they're the most likely to have fresh ideas and not suffer from groupthink.
Oh, totally.
Yet, you know, how unlikely is it for most of us to show up and go, hey, your job is to get up to speed and to learn this and to tell us all the things that you see that you think we don't see. You know, that's probably something I could work on.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to be the one asking everyone to do that, and sometimes it's hard for people to step into that, you know, and be critical of something that could be improved. But yeah, I'll tell you, my game has improved considerably by multiple, precisely because I was willing to let go. I was willing to let the other team members come up with ideas that were far better than the ones I came up with. Yeah,
it's an interesting statement, letting go, right? You think about how, especially when there's risk involved, especially when there's uncertainty, we can have such a tendency to hold on to things so tight.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like that idea of don't be so sure of what you want that you wouldn't accept something better.
Yeah, totally.
You know, it's a great saying out there.
Yep.
And yet, you know, we get an idea in our mind and we know how it's going to work and we latch onto it, and we're looking for all the validation to prove that our idea is the idea, right?
Yeah.
Well, thinking about the future of the business and you know, let's say this Kickstarter goes off the charts, which because everybody's listening today goes and buys it or gets their friends to buy. What's phase 2? Where do you hope to go?
Well, I want the game to be a commercial success because I think it'll draw people together in new and meaningful ways. The game does things that other games don't do. It causes people to become the entertainment, not consume external entertainment, which is really novel and unique these days. But there's a deeper meaning behind Spark, the magic of storytelling, this game we've got, and that is that the stories we tell ourselves shape our relationships, the direction and trajectory of our lives. And so there's other curriculum I have plans to build, even almost a corporate application of the very game mechanics we have to unlock business problems. It's insane what happens when you get a group of creatives trying to work on a marketing message, for example, and then you play some music in the background with some prompts, and all of a sudden they're coming up with narratives to describe their product in ways they had never considered before. It's insane. So that's coming up in addition to just some other deeper reflection on what it means to tell stories and how are our stories in our lives shaping where we're going and how we're interpreting the events that we can't control.
Yeah. Well, thinking about marketing, for instance, right? Kickstarter is, it's very democratic. It's amazing opportunity. We've had a number of folks on here who have done millions of dollars off Kickstarter, and it's been fun for me to learn from them. But it's not by accident. You know what I mean? Like there's intentional marketing behind those great Kickstarter success stories. Can you talk about your blog and building a following and some of the work you've done over your history to get to today?
Well, yeah, my blog has to do with my son's life story called Mitchell's Journey, and its function was really to kind of help. It was basically, that was my my couch, my psychology, sort of dumping all my issues and putting my pieces back together again. I'm ordinarily a pretty private guy, but as I started to decompress some of the difficult things in life and started to make meaning of it, it really gathered a great deal of attention from people all across the world.
Can you tell us some of the numbers or some of the...
Yeah, we're north of 310,000 readers on Facebook, and lots of other, 10,000 or 15,000, I think, on Instagram, and just But the idea is that people are coming to listen to these stories, not because I'm trying to throw my broken glass on the floor, but because I'm scooping them up and trying to make a new mosaic with all the things that are would otherwise be broken.
Well, this is what I want to talk about is. There's so many folks that they try to manufacture authenticity, or they try to, where the sole aim is, how do we get more followers? How do we get more eyeballs? How do we whatever? And it's interesting how unlikely that is to get, deep followers who are passing the message on and telling their friends and their mom and their cousins that they got to check this out. And how often, like, being our own mascot and like living our own message regardless of the results ends up being the thing that invites results. Would you agree with that? Would you say it different?
I think I totally agree with that. Yeah, and I'd be lying if I didn't wonder, I do notice when certain posts have more shares, and I care about that because that means it hit a chord and it's helping someone and they want to help pass that along. But yeah, it's a difficult balance, and I just found that just take the mask off and I'm willing to admit all my weaknesses. I'm a deeply flawed man that's got lots of challenges, but I'm not so bad either. And so, we're just all a weird mosaic of all of our life experiences.
That's a fascinating statement to me, because I feel like, being the boss at work or anywhere in our life, this temptation to, whitewash our past and and like social mediaize our life and try to only show the best parts that are amazing to folks, right? There's that temptation, and then the pendulum can swing the other way. We can fall off the balance beam the other way of the, oh, I'm so terrible, and it's like exaggerations on the, well, I'm the worst person that's ever lived, and and it's not truthful. Like in the name of humility, it can go the other way of, it's almost another way of getting attention of, look at how terrible I am.
Yeah, for sure. And nobody wants to see that. Like, I think too oftentimes people will share their hardships, and it's like they're throwing all their broken glass on the floor, and they wonder why everyone's separating, because they themselves don't want to step on that broken glass and cut their own feet. And in reality, if we can scoop our pieces back and try to make sense and meaning of it in an authentic, honest way, I think people lean in because they're saying, oh, wow, look how you're putting those together. I think I can do something like that for me.
Well, can you talk about, the difference between having 3,000 people reading this and having 300,000 people read it, and how it's maybe made you more thoughtful about what you're writing, or if it had any impact, the difference between when there's 3,000 people reading it now with 300,000?
I started with maybe 30 readers, and then when people started to flood in, as I started to share a little bit about my son's situation in the hospital, I frankly felt a little violated. I was like, wait, dude, this is my private space. Like, why are people coming in? And then I started to let go, and I just began to just share my heart, and I didn't care, and I wasn't trying to play to an audience at all. And I don't think I do today either. I think I don't. I hope I'm as authentic as I ever was in terms of sharing stories. But, I just think that it's just really important to just be candid about the situations we face and what meaning. I think that's what people want more than anything, is how do I make meaning out of my own circumstance? And that's precisely why people follow or started to read my blog, was they began to figure out, oh, if I thought this way or did that, maybe I can make more meaning out of my own circumstance.
Okay, what you just said makes so much sense to me, because I think about the folks that use sharing on a social media. Like, I'm maybe more of a private guy myself, and I look at the way some of the folks use sharing on social media, that it's almost like a desperate plea for help, but the way it's done, it's almost like they're clawing the eyes out from the person who could potentially be swimming up to save them from drowning.
Totally.
Your idea of this throwing the glass on the ground, it's interesting as you say that, how much I think about this, how often those messages come across as, oh, poor me.
Yeah.
you guys couldn't understand how special I am for how bad this is.
Oh yeah, no.
Rather than this like humility of like, I'm going through something really tough, just like a whole bunch of you probably are.
Yeah.
Like this, the temptation to be special, it distances us from others, doesn't it?
Totally does.
Rather than lessons learned, being honest about the highs and lows in a connected way. How could this be of benefit to others? Rather than look at how different I am than the rest of you. Mm-hmm. Would you say it different than that, or what kind of reaction would you have?
I think you said it well. And I think a lot of people that will make comments and share excerpts from my blog tend to say, this is the hardest thing I've ever read, but it's simultaneously the most inspirational. Because what they're doing is they're recognizing that, yes, something really hurts, but also I can do something with this. And what meaning does this have in my own life? And I think everybody's hungry for meaning and purpose. And I think we're starved of that a lot in media, in social media in particular, because all we do is compare ourselves to other people. And when somebody finally takes the mask off and says, hey, this is the real me, and I have doubts and worries and self-questions, but I also love me, and I'm okay. There's my most popular article that I ever wrote was called I'm Okay, But I'm Not Okay, and That's Okay. And it was the story of my son walking into my home office. I'm in a heap, just bawling. I'm writing a story about the funeral directors closing the casket on my son, and this would be the last time I'd ever see him in mortality. And my son walks in, here I am bawling, and he says, are you okay? And of course, you know, the Titan in me was like, oh yeah, I'm fine. I just got something in my eye.
Different sons.
Sorry, different sons. Thank you.
You have more than one son,
yes,
I'm guessing.
Yes. Can I restart that?
It's great. Just go.
So my older son walks in the room as I'm writing about my son, Mitchell, and he says, Dad, are you okay? And I immediately, my first reaction was to just say, oh, I've got something in my eye, everything's okay. And then I thought, I'm robbing my son, Ethan, of the truth. I'm just going to unmask and say, you know, son, I'm not okay, but I'm okay. You know what I mean? And my son says, he almost had this look of relief over his face. And he's like, yeah, I know what you mean. And he walked out of the room, and we had this real moment where Dad was able to show his oldest son that he can cry about his other son who's lost and, you know, passed away, and that I can be okay and not okay, and that's okay. And so that article, it's been shared millions of times, and it continues to this day. I get people commenting on it, and I wrote it 4.5 years ago. And so I think that's what people want more than anything, is to feel like they're okay to be not okay.
But two things. One, it's interesting how your willingness to be honest about that situation then gives him permission to feel that way, right?
Yeah.
And I guess my thought here, maybe as we kind of close out part two, is again this theme I've had of, you know, the pendulum or falling off the balance beam at work. You know, this idea of, you know, the American workplace, the global workplace is becoming more accepting of humans having feelings instead of being robots, right? Yeah. And yet, with many of our clients on the consulting side at Mylan, it can get to a place of like, but what if I need to hold them accountable? You know, shouldn't I care about them as a person? How does this match with them delivering for the team? And what about, you know, when I do care that they've got this tough thing that's happening in their life and the team still needs results from them? Mm-hmm. Any advice on folks who feel like, oh man, maybe my pendulum swung too far this way and now I need advice of how to get back to center?
You know, I think the greatest thing we can ever do for our colleagues is, one, you know, love and appreciate them as human beings, but also require things from them and expect things from them as professionals. Now, certainly there's circumstances, extenuating and otherwise, that we can be a little gentle in terms of, hey, this person needs a little time to process their grief. But greater trust and traction will happen when we can say, hey, you know, I need you to step up here. I'm missing this. Will you do this for me? And the moment we do that, actually, people want to be held accountable. They want to know that they're needed and that they're a load-bearing wall. And so, you know, is almost contrary to that whole notion of being, you know, human with people. Humans want to have structure. They want to be depended on. They want to know that they're important. And holding them accountable helps them feel that. It's never been destructive for me.
Yeah, it is funny how it's probably not a shock. I'm thinking about a specific conversation from 2 weeks ago. Uh-huh. This individual that this leader needs to help kind of bring more of their A game to work. Mm-hmm. They're probably not oblivious to the fact.
Oh no.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
There's probably some rationalization going on, and they probably actually aren't feeling great about themselves not delivering on this, but they're kind of getting away with it. And sometimes there can almost be a bit of relief of like, if we don't have to dive into blame about the past, but we can talk about a different future of the, then I'd be able to quit. I'd be able to quit rationalizing and feel better about myself.
Totally. Yeah, you're right. I think there's that inner story going on in our heads. And once we call it out and say, hey, I see you and I need you to step in, they'll do it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, listen, everybody, please check out Chris's game on Kickstarter. And is there a website in addition to Kickstarter? Or
yeah, they can visit sparkstorytelling.com, or they can just search Kickstarter. Spark the Magic of Storytelling is the name of the game.
Oh, that's great. And the Facebook page you talked about, how do they find
Mitchell's
that? If they
Journey.
Want to check it out? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Hey, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Bye, everybody. Well, that's it for the episode. One other thing I wanted to tell you about, if you remember the guys from Convoy in episodes back, Ken Free and Trent Mano, I went on one of their CEO trips to New York, and I met a guy named Brent Thompson, very successful entrepreneur. He was former CEO of Jive Communications, big company now, I think $300 or $400 million. Anyways, he started a new company called blipbillboards.com. I'm super stoked they're a sponsor now. But I remember a year and some ago when I met him, I thought it was genius. Instead of having to buy 6 months or a year's worth of billboard for thousands of dollars, you can buy 8 seconds at a time for like 10 or 20 cents. You pick what billboard you want it on, what time of day you want it to run. And it just puts so much power in the hands of marketers and CEOs who want to try something and see if it works. You can buy as many or as few as you want, change it as many times as you want. I think now our podcast is being advertised on billboards in like 18 different states because we have these guys as sponsors. We're pretty excited about it. Hope you check out blipbillboards.com. Thanks.